I'm wondering if this is a time to have the audience get a crack at this. There's a microphone. You can just all line up with some questions. And the one thing I'd like to do to protect my buddies up here is anything that feels that you'd rather not talk about it, you get a chance to do just what they do, I assume, in Comfort Zone Camp, which is take a pass. So as long as that's the rule, that if you prefer not to answer, that's fine. But I'd love you to ask any questions that you were wishing that you could. Who wants to start? Jump right to the microphone. You know what? I have learned over the years, sir, although you're right, if we line up, then everybody gets, I'd love you to, because then there'll be a line. It's amazing how that happens. So if you get there before you know it, somebody else will say, well, I'll just get right behind him, and then I'll get right behind him. So guys, just come on down.
Everybody's doing it.
My name's Dave Benshoff. I'm a chaplain with Bon Secours Hospice.
Thank you for coming.
19 years ago, we lost our 14-year-old son to complications with asthma. And I wanted to talk to David here a minute because it was a professor from my seminary that came to us following the death of our son and the service. And he said, David, I hope that you're able to lean into your naked faith. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, naked faith is when nothing else makes sense that you've preached for years. And the scriptures don't mean anything. Your prayers go out and drop to the bottom. But yet you gather those around you. And I'm glad that I had coworkers and peers that stood around me and just helped me to still believe in God. And out of that believing in God began then to build a new normal. With 9/11, they were saying we can't wait till the nation gets back to normal. That was the hard part of it, one of it, because there wasn't there anymore. But out of my son's death, we started with Compassionate Friends, my wife and I, and soon became facilitators. But then we also, I heard so many stories of families that had no spiritual care at the time of the death of their child. And so I resigned my church, went to UVA for a 2-year residency in clinical pastoral education, and am now serving as a chaplain and in hospice. And I'm more fulfilled now in my spirit and being than I ever was. The rub is I wouldn't be here unless my son died. And so, I'm encouraged by your testimony and your strength that you have there. But the naked faith fits. And with families in hospice and everything else that I deal with and care for, I offer them the gift of naked faith. And it helps to tear away all the expectations of everyone else.
It's a wonderful term. I love it. I'm going to use it.
I think we're all going to steal that term, I think.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Somebody else. Yeah, come on down and line up right behind her.
Hello, good evening. I just, with the holidays coming up, I know sometimes it's hard for families when you have family gatherings. One thing that you all mentioned is that, we know as we grieve, we're in different places on our grief journeys. And I feel like with my family, when we're all at different places and we come together for a family event, sometimes people think you should say things about a missing person or not say things because you don't want to say the wrong thing. So are there any good recommendations in terms of uplifting activities or ways to address that?
What do you want to do? Not what your mother or father, whoever wants you to do.
I would like to cry in front of a group of people I don't know.
I personally, we made it a point to tell our favorite stories about the person at holidays on purpose. And the first one was super awkward and really weird.
Yeah.
But 12 years later, we still do it. And we laugh. And we just, sometimes we tell the same story year after year, but we still laugh. Okay. But, it would...
Maybe to each his own, like he just said, what do you want to do? You have to do what feels right for you. And then your other individual, whether it's your sibling or your parent or your aunt, they're going to do what is good for them. And if that's being quiet and not saying anything, then that's what they're feeling. But you do what you need to do.
I think as long as there's a tolerance for individual decisions about how to behave, you can't go wrong. Where you can, and I think it's not a bad idea if you have a family dynamic where you can actually pick up the phone and speak to them about, before we go to Aunt Frances's, I just want to tell you that I'm a little worried about the blessing today, or I'm worried about the empty chair, or I'm worried about if we don't talk about him, or if we do talk about him. And so giving people that extra space, that extra room to do whatever feels right. I often tell any family that's newly bereaved, or whether that's 2 to 3 years, however long it takes, is to be able to inform anyone who's hosting you, I'm going to make a play for this. I'm going to try to show up, but I may stay for 10 minutes. I may stay for the whole day. I'm going to do what I can. And that's it. And I want that tolerance that my behavior is acceptable. Boy, when you can get that done, that's fine. And that means talking about it with your family, which is challenging for a lot of us with families when there is no grief, right? The idea that everybody can tolerate differences. It's just a fascinating thing what holidays bring up for everybody. But I think grief at the holidays, you ask for what you need. I'm going to say it again. Ask for what you need. If you don't, you have nobody to blame but yourself. You've got to ask for it, because Aunt Frances cannot anticipate it.
I had a comment from a hospice chaplain when my dad died. They said very clearly, remember, once the person's passed, the grieving's not about them. It's about you. And so don't worry about what your loved one would think or want. This is about you guys and getting the help. So if you want to do it, go for it. If you don't want to do it, that's cool. Don't go for it. Either way, but do what you specifically want. And thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Right. Make sure you bring Kleenex too. Yes.
Hi. My question has to do with my son dealing with grief, but tell you a little bit why I'm here first. I lost my 16-year-old son 2.5 years ago to suicide. But my story doesn't begin there. When I was 8, my own mother died by suicide. And then I was very, very close to her brother, my uncle, who kind of took me in and, kind of watched after me a lot and kind of helped me with college and that sort of thing. When I was about 25, he also died by suicide. And then my oldest sister, who took me in my high school years to kind of take care of me. My dad had remarried, and I had a stepmom that I actually called her my stepmonster. I asked if I could live with my sister, and so I was able to be the big sister to her 3 young children, and they were pretty much my little brothers and sisters. Well, her middle son, when he was 27, and I think I was around 36 or 7, he took his life. And 2 weeks before my children, 2 weeks before my son died, I was always tried to find a way. I always kind of found a surrogate mother, once I didn't have a mom. And my ex-mother-in-law became my best friend, and she kind of helped me raise my 3 kids. I was divorced, and she died, and 2 weeks later, my son died. So, but my biggest concern, I think now, is my daughter. She kind of went through post-traumatic stress because she was with my son the night he died, and she was the one that had to call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and tell me that her brother had killed himself. And my son was with me. He was in bed. It was 5:30 in the morning, or 2:30. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I, paced around the house, knowing my son was upstairs in bed, and I knew I had to tell him that his brother was gone, and I didn't want to wake him up. I had to call my sister in the middle of the night and tell her what had happened after she had lost her son. And my daughter was calling me from her dad's house saying, "When are you coming, Mom?" And I kept saying, "Well, I'm coming, but I got to wait till my sister gets over here because I can't tell Mason until my sister gets here." And finally, I told my son, and his fists went through the wall. I had to wake him. It was about 5:30 in the morning when I woke him up. And I think what I struggle with now is he has been my daughter, she got help. She suffered some post-traumatic stress from the situation, but she got some wonderful help, and she's actually doing very well. But my son doesn't talk about it. He's 20. My daughter's 23. He's in college. And, what do you do with the child that you really can't tell them how to grieve? You can't force them to grieve. You've seen their faith that they had grown up in is really not there. And, that's what I think I struggle with, is trying to figure out what to do with my son who has been I took him to counseling right away. Right away was very resistant, and then he went to another counselor, and that went pretty well. But what do you do with a child like that you can't get him to? I wanted to go to comfort zone. I would like him to do whatever. But do you have any suggestions?
Well, I always start with what the child's behavior looks like. So you said he's 20 and he's in school. He's in college.
Right.
And so you have to wait for something to bubble up. You have to wait for, you said he put his fist through the wall. Is he a rageful person? Is he drinking too much? Is he able to stay in school? Does he do relationships? Your history, and that's one of the things we didn't talk about, is how does your your history as a child, your original family history, how does it kind of come right in front of you as an adult around bereavement? You have a remarkable history, and I use the word remarkable,
I call myself the poster child for suicide survivor.
Yeah. And so there was a normalizing, and that's a ridiculous word to use, but there's a normalizing within that family culture around how we die. Right. And so that 20-year-old, you want to do some prevention with him. Sometimes, I always say if it's not broken, don't fix it. I say you start with somebody asking for help. But if, in fact, there's behavior that is troublesome, you start with the behavior. Getting people to want help is very, very hard. I think if I write another book, it's going to be called Whose Business Is It Anyway? And that is it my business if you are a mess? Well, only to the extent that it bothers me, only to the extent that it affects me. So I think that's where it starts. If he's rude, if he doesn't show up, if so-and-so, and then you can talk about it. I've learned one thing that maybe is helpful. I've been doing a lot of work with the Navy SEALs, and that's a tough group to talk about grief with, in case any of you were wondering. How do you do that? And so I have a way of doing it, and I say to the SEALs, so is there anybody in this room that doesn't want his child to grow up to be mentally tough? And they all kind of come to attention and say, oh no, we want our kids to be mentally tough. And I said, okay, well, this is the formula. You have to know what you feel. You have to have a safe place to express it. You have to be able to manage what you feel. And then that leads to your managing behavior. Mm-hmm. That's called emotional intelligence, by the way. So now we're all going to learn about how to raise emotionally intelligent kids, and they are all on board with me. So if you can start with, being mentally tough, being able to manage whatever lies ahead for your 20-year-old, sometimes that's a way to kind of hook them into. It means being able to know how you feel and how to manage your feelings. That's the best I can give you.
He'll cry now and then. He and his sister and his dad, we were all together for my daughter's birthday Sunday, and the three of them tears started coming out, and I know it was memory of Jackson. And every once in a while on Facebook, he'll write something that encourages me that he is, he can get it out some, but,
Well, I think the other language that I use is to say, you deserve to get some help. You deserve to do some work. Think of what you've had to experience. So I think that's it. And then, of course, it's very hard. It's just like finding a good dentist, a good lawyer, a good therapist. There's got to be a fit there. And so you just keep working on it, and you try not to be judgmental and try to keep revisiting it. Okay. Thank you. Somebody else?
Well, are there any workbooks, I'm asking the professionals in the room, are there any workbooks or any books specifically that she could leave for him to read on his own time so he can start the process on his own? If so, someone please tell her later.
Okay.
It's great. What are the resources? Sure. Take care. Good evening.
Hi. I have a question for Meredith. I was wondering, did you feel like the trauma component and the grief component at the beginning just sort of all ran together, and you couldn't really tell that was it grief or was it trauma? And how much of your trauma do you have to work through before you can work on the grief even more? Or how do you combine those two components?
That is a good question. It's kind of difficult to answer because they did seem to kind of bleed into each other. The grief part was early on was still such like a numbing thing, and then you just cry so much that you can't cry anymore. And my husband and I, we would wake up every day and we'd be so disappointed that it wasn't all a bad dream. And but the trauma part of it, I think in some cases it fed right into and was on top of the grief, and then I think sometimes it was separate, and I felt like I needed to deal with that separate as well, so that I could have the opportunity to grieve properly. That might be confusing, but...
Why do you ask the question?
I was 7 when I lost my mom, and it was very immediate. No one told me she was dying, and I was in the room. And all of a sudden, code blue went off, and I was yanked out. The doctors were just... pushing me out, and that was the last time I was ever in the room. And growing up and dealing with my grief now, there's a big trauma component I'm now realizing is there. And I've been able to numb out the pain for many years until I found Comfort Zone. So Comfort Zone has been amazing. But I guess now, if I was able to numb out the pain, how much of the trauma was I able to numb out too, right? And right now I'm beginning to learn that both components have affected my life, relationships and school, and lifestyle. So which component do you go first?
I don't think it matters. I think it's a great question, and somehow being able to put them into little boxes somehow seems important to you. What you really want to do, you deserve to work with someone who's competent and really knows how to deal with trauma. And knows what those triggers are and can protect you and help you move through triggers that you may have now as an adult. Sure.
So they won't hinder each other, right?
I'm sorry?
They won't. Each component won't really hinder each other.
No, but it's really just important to be able to recognize the difference between trauma and grief. And then you just need a professional to be able to help you with both.
And it sounds like if she's carrying it with her, that it's a burden and it won't go away. So I take that recommendation definitely to go work on specifically that, like separately, and see if you can.
Right. And I am, and I think I'm just realizing there's two. At first to me it was just grief,
Right.
And I think the curiosity comes from the capacity to numb out one and not even realize the other one exists, and now to find it.
Sure. Yeah, so it's educating yourself, educating everybody about it.
Do you live here in Richmond?
I do.
Because there are some very good people here that might be able to help you.
Yeah, I think I found some too. Thank you.
Well, you bring up a really good point, which is sometimes grief can kind of trick you into thinking everything else going on in your life is just about the grief. And there might be a whole lot of other things going on that have totally separate from the grief, but because the grief is so loud, you blame everything on the grief. And I don't know if I have much more than that as a statement, but I mean, definitely, it's not always just about grief.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
Good evening, and thank you for what you're doing tonight. 19 years ago, I lost my sister, who was 19, and it was around this time of year, and I still miss her today. My experience, though, I'm connecting with what Matt was saying about how I actually came to the point where I became thankful for her death because it changed my life in so many ways. I was a pretty self-absorbed and heavily defended human being. I was a young man when I lost her. She was 13 years my junior, so I was almost like a parent to her in a way. But I started to evolve. With her death, I started to evolve and ended up working in homeless services. A few years after she died, I made a life-changing decision to do nonprofit work. And the last couple of years in that role, I worked closely with men who were leaving addiction, who were actually in the process of leaving addiction in recovery. And I saw firsthand how unresolved grief really is such an incredible burden to those men, and how it was such a relief to be in their presence and to allow them to grieve over just these tremendous losses that they've been medicating for so many years. Many of the men for 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. I've decided to make a change, and now I'm actually I'm going to interview tomorrow at Bon Secours to get into their clinical pastoral education program after getting my theology degree a few years back. My interest is actually in David's path because I heard how you established your nonprofit and you started working at Comfort Zone Camp. I guess because I've worked in ministry for quite a while now and want to continue down that path in maybe a way that's more true to my own self, I was interested in you, David, how your loss, how did it affect your ministry, other than climbing over your desk and all, and berating women on the phone and that kind of thing? I'm sure there was some positive aspects that came out of that in time.
I had a colleague, Tom Blair, who was the rector of the parish. I was his senior associate, who was a very brilliant man. And he came to me in many ways. But he came to me one day and he said, would you be willing to ask Dr. Hester if she would be willing, she was a parishioner, if she would be willing to start a grief support group here in church. And he said, if you would ask her to do it, you might want to just audit the group, because down the road there's something that you might be able to offer. What I did not know is that Tom had already talked to Pick Hester. She was waiting for my call, so I called her, and she said, David, let me think about it. Let me call you back tomorrow. She called me back tomorrow, and she said she would do it. So a group began to meet, and she said, but would you be willing to find some people in the parish who have had losses? So I looked through the recent funerals and word of mouth and whatever, and we put together a group of about 12. And I called them and I said, I'm calling for Dr. Hester, who's going to be leading a group. And they all started showing up. And they met, and it met for 6 weeks, and then the group would choose to either go on. Sometimes more people would come in, sometimes. Anyway, for 2 years she conducted this group. And for 2 years I audited it because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And I began to admit that, gosh, this is kind of helpful for me too. 2 years later, Pick called me and she said, David, she said, my schedule is such that I can no longer have these free evenings. She said, how would you feel about taking the group over? And so that was in 1998, I guess. I have ever since then, in any parish I have served, we have offered a grief support group where people come. Sometimes it's been all widows, sometimes it's been widowers, and this interesting dynamics. I'm currently working with a group of dads who have lost children who are adults adult children. They didn't want to really meet in the church because that's a little churchy. Men don't want to come to the church to meet. So we meet at the James River campus of the Country Club of Virginia. And God has a sense of humor. We go in there, all these screens, and they have Fox News on them. But anyway, we go in, and here are 6 men sitting around a table, guy in his collar with all these men. These other guys are making deals on horse trading or beef or real estate or banking, whatever. And here are these group of men. Every once in a while, one of them will reach for a Kleenex and cry, and they look at us. But one of the things that I have appreciated and found the most purpose, because I came to realize there's a lot of stuff, at least for me in churches, that goes on after Jamie died that seemed kind of irrelevant. But that's more about me than anything else. I have found tremendous purpose in being part of seeing people come to these groups and support each other. I mean, the stuff they do with each other, reaching out to each other, is just incredible. So we meet once a month, and when this group is over, we'll maybe start another one. I find one way I've changed, I do a lot more listening when people come in on any issue. Clergy should do more listening anyway. But I find when people come to my office, I ask a lot more questions and listen. And I think I'm more sensitive to things than I was before we lost Jamie. So it has changed my whole focus. It also, one of the downsides to that is I had to be very careful when people come in with complaints about things that they think are important.
Yeah.
And I remember once at a coffee hour at St. Stephen's, somebody came up to me and he was complaining because we served decaf coffee at coffee hour. He said, "This coffee's terrible. Is there anything you can do about it?" And I said, "Let me tell you, sir, there are a few things. I could give you a short list of things that are probably even more serious than the fact you're not getting a real coffee." And I could watch him as he backed away because he. But I think to be more present with people in areas where facing things like you and those of you who have spoken and shared your story, and I suspect there are so many people out here tonight who have stories, and it's our role to support and be there and to be present and to listen. And that's what's given purpose to my present ministry.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great story. Good luck tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is
Good
the
luck to you.
last question that we'll take, I think. Is there a question coming up? Oh, good. Sir, I like your sweatshirt.
I guess my question is for Matt, really. So, I guess my grandfather was, I guess, a hoarder. And my mom, she also followed suit and had a room in the house that had a lot of, all of her stuff. And there was always a lot of, I guess, her stuff laying around. And then when she passed away, I can see myself kind of now keeping a lot of things, especially things that she gave me. So I'm sure my wife can attest to that fact that. So I guess my question is, I maybe keep these things because it reminds me how much she loved me. And I think you said something that people keep these things because they had grief. At what point, I guess, is it okay to kind of, I don't want to separate myself from these things, but how do I kind of disassociate?
Yeah, well, the blunt answer is, I mean this with no disrespect, keeping it's not going to bring them back. Remembering the stories, remembering the real love, that does. I will tell you, as a professional, I would have one answer to that. As a husband, I would have a different answer to that. I kept a lot of things of my dad's. I actually paid $100 a month for my dad's $500 car that he left me when he died. He left me this 81 BMW 320i. It was a piece of crap. I loved it. I loved it with my life. I learned to drive in it. We went camping in it. It was everything to me. It was what my dad gave me. When I had kids, it just didn't make sense anymore. So for me, it was just natural progression in life. This is all I have left of my dad. My dad left me this ring, and I wear it everywhere. And people have accused me of like flaunting it, and you better believe it. I do. I mean, don't feel bad about you loving these people and you celebrating these people. You just got to simply pare it down. I hate to ask the spouse, did the spouse know those people at all or no? Let's talk real quick afterwards, but I mean, don't feel bad about it. You're allowed to have things that celebrate your loved ones. You simply got to pare it down. And your life will eventually those things don't matter as much, believe it or not. It just will happen naturally. I can smell you. You're not a hoarder. If you were a hoarder, I would know. Okay? You're not. So don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you afterwards.
All right.
Just real quick, with mine, I tried to dwindle it down.
How did you get rid of all your daughter's stuff?
Because I had, a whole bedroom full and a million baby dolls and everything. And I just kept, after a little while, I just kept the things that really reminded me of her, like the specific shirt with the horse on it. I could picture her in it, so I had to keep that one. And I gave my friend some items from her room, and I said, I want this to be used and enjoyed by another little girl instead of just letting it collect dust in the attic. And so, it gave me joy to give them some of these items.
Donation's huge. If you can really focus on what that person would have enjoyed it for, give it to someone that will really enjoy it more than you can.
Yeah, we were going through her closet and going through all the dresses and whatnot, and just remembering her in it. So I didn't want my dad to get rid of all that stuff. He obviously wanted to get out of the house, and I wasn't going to take it because I'm not going to wear it.
Well,
but, I always say
we donated it. And
like I pull a swatch off the shirt and frame it, hang it on the wall,
right.
Celebrate it. That's
or the quilts that you can have made
quilts.
out of the clothes.
Yeah.
You pick your favorite clothes that remind you of your mom in it, and you can get it made, and then you can sit and watch TV and have it just draped over you. If you can bear to, have it cut and stuff like that. But
to bring it full circle, it's not going to happen immediately. It's going to take time. And you talk about the work. It's all about the work, man. You got to invest the time. And I guess this is going to open back up to other things we're talking about. It is not going to happen overnight. It may take you 5-10 years. So be it. But as long as you're working and you're putting the effort towards it, if you're letting go of more than you're keeping, fine, you're doing good. But put that work in.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. My experience has been that the stuff has this charged valence associated with it, and as you do your work around it, it just becomes more neutralized. Now there will be the ring, the special little shirt with the horse on it, something that's very special to you that you may always want to keep close to you in terms of a commemoration. But for families that just feel they just can't move to that next step, often I'll say, really respectfully go to Home Depot, get a bunch of bins, very carefully the act of cleaning and folding and placing in this clean box and put a cover on it and put it in the attic and know it's there, and just know you didn't have to get rid of it and you didn't have to be purposefully donating it. It's just upstairs. That sometimes is an extra step that can be helpful, and you need to do it when you're ready. As long as you're doing work, I don't think you can be doing it wrong. If you're not, then I think that the charge that the stuff has is because you still have work to do. And so that's a way of kind of knowing that.
You could possibly find a treasure as well, like looking through her stuff. And my sister and I kept a whole bunch of my mom's jewelry it was in my guest room closet for the past 6 years. And I'm like, you know what? It's not our taste. We're not going to wear it. This one's sentimental because our dad gave it to her. Let's keep that. But I went and sold some gold, and we got $630. And we were like, thanks, Mom. That's awesome. It was stuff that wasn't really sentimental to us, but it had been sitting in my closet for 5 years. I'm like, man. Okay. So I called my sister. She's like, no way. I was like,
That's great. So take care with that. It's on the back of your little pamphlet, Beautiful People don't just happen. I've got 3 new friends here. And what I will tell you about them, and I think that you'll agree, that their story is not over, that their loss isn't finished with. They can competently and compassionately and sensitively talk about this journey in a way that is so helpful to the community. And I have such appreciation for it. But the memory of Annabelle and your dad and what your journey's been like, and it's still, it's got a trajectory. There's no question that there's a trajectory. And for David and Jamie and the work you're doing, you really give us all incredible sense of hope about the mastery of these coping skills and finding ways to really, truly transform what was a crisis in your life into something that is so meaningful, so purposeful. And I am so pleased to have been able to sit on this stage with you all, to have 3 new friends, and to thank you for sharing. Can we all thank them? Yeah, I agree. There you go. Great.
Whoa, hold up.
Yep.
Thank
Matt
you.
has something he wants to
I'll say real quick, to all the professionals out there, please know that 4 or 5 different professionals planted a seed in my head, and it took about 4 or 5 years for me to get there. So do know that if you just say one little thing, eventually it does matter. And for the non-professionals out there that are here kind of fishing, looking to get ready, please take action. Don't just do the work. Start the work. It's going to take a while. It's great that you're getting information, but go a little step further and start taking some action.
It's a very good lesson for all of us. I want to leave you, and I know that we have some friends that want to talk to you after I hand the mic to Allison. And I want to leave you with a warning, a reminder, and a challenge. My warning is, if you're going to do grief work, you have to take really good care of yourself because it's hard work. My reminder is to let your heart lead you. If you're working with children, let the children lead you and go with them as they go. If you are helping an adult individual, let them take the lead as well. And my challenge is so simple to say and so hard to do. And my challenge is simply to say that only by facing our losses can we truly embrace life in living. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Allison?